So, first of all, I'd like to just do a quick overview. I don't know if you think this way, but I like to think of where in time we are, right? Every time we talk about something. So, let's do a really quick overview. First of all, on this screen, you can see this is a timeline, even though it doesn't have age times very clearly. I want you to look in the left-hand side over here where my big, huge cursor is, where the Earth started, right, about 4 billion years ago. And so, think about that. For billions of years, there are plants and animals, but no humans. Okay, and so if you look through, this is a really interesting timeline. I'm not going to, read all this to you. We're not going to talk about it all because it's not science class. But it is really interesting if you look through to see the progression of animal life and which species were dominating. And if you look here, I'm sure all of you are at least familiar with the Jurassic period, right? Because of the dinosaur movies. So just to give you some perspective, right? The dinosaurs go extinct around 63 million years ago, around here, okay? And then after they go extinct, some other animals are making appearances, more mammals, and primates are coming down to earth. And this is, of course, going to be coming down from the trees, coming down, and we are going to eventually, humans are going to be descended from them. Okay, but remember, it takes millions of years. And so if you look at this, right, even though we are here, then it's going to take all this time, and it's not till about 4.5 million years ago that we even see some humans, that we call them pre-human primates. And that was about 2.5 million years ago that we start to finally switch over and call them like the beginning of the human species. So that's represented down here where you see all those millions of years of progression. And we're going to talk about that. Also, this is a little bit misleading because it looks like it is in a singular progression, right? And that is not true. There are some overlaps and the species, some dying out and things like that. Okay, so if we go on to the next one, I want real quickly for you a review of the number line we talked about last time. Before Common Era is the same thing as BC or before Christ, and the Common Era is the same as AD, right? Anno Domini, the year of the Lord. So we're taking out the religious aspect. Remember, we talked about that last time. Okay, so here is the thing. We are talking about a time in history before we have any written records. So we call this prehistoric times. Prehistory meaning the time before written language. So we don't have any writings to talk about. We have the oldest writing systems were about 3,400 BC-ish. And so you can see that on the number line here with the red line. Okay, so everything older than that is called prehistoric or prehistory times. Okay, so the question, of course, is, well, then how do we find out what happened about, all this time ago? And so, of course, we rely on science. And archaeologists do a lot of this work for us. Historians tend to focus on things that people left behind, like letters and writing and diaries, right? Written things. But so we need archaeologists to tell us about the people and the cultures when we don't have any writing, and they work on artifacts. So artifacts, of course, are objects that are left behind by the people. They could be tools or pottery or weapons or whatever is left behind that they can figure out about their culture from that. Okay, and so how do they do that? Of course, there's two things that really help them in dating things. One is radiocarbon dating. You have probably heard of that. There's something called a half-life. We know that radiocarbon, or C14, has a half-life of about 5,730 years. A half-life is just like it sounds, how long it takes for something to decrease to half. Okay, and so the way it works is all organisms continuously replenish their radiocarbon by breathing and eating, right? Taking in and exhaling. Carbon goes in and out. And so any organism, of course, stops that exhalation and that replenishing after it dies. When it becomes a fossil, then you can look at the fossil, and since we know how long it takes for the decaying object to lose, the half-life of radiocarbon, then we can know how old it is, right? So that is a big thing. And then, of course, and more recently, we've gotten DNA analysis. And of course, that's gotten much better over the years. In fact, a lot of things as evidence and science gets better, scientists and historians have to kind of change their thinking. Like, one of the things was there was evidence when they did DNA analysis that Neanderthals and humans actually mated, and had offspring. So before that time, we did not know that, and so that is an interesting development. Okay, so let's talk about. I'm going to go through real quickly so you understand. There were, of course, apes, and right. Eventually, we're going to get what we call hominids, and that are what we call, they're human-like creatures, okay? So we're talking back around 4 million years old, okay? And we have evidence that they start to, that they're linked to human development. The first one that we call pre-humans is Australopithecus, and that is the big invention, or the big discovery, was Lucy, they call her. Lucy was a Australopithecus that was discovered in Africa and in Ethiopia, and it was big news. And the reason she's called Lucy is because the team was listening to the Beatles at the time. This is a favorite song. Okay, so what they really found were a partial skeleton, but was exciting that even though it wasn't a complete skeleton, because a lot of the bones didn't repeat, and what was missing on one side was often on the other side, so they got a really good indication of what she looked like. And they figured out that she was walking upright, so that is a major distinction, right, from the normal ape family. And also she had opposable thumbs. So I want you to think about opposable thumbs means that your tip of your thumb can cross across your palm, right? And so I would like you to try to pick up something like a coin without using your thumb. It's very hard, right? And so that is a big deal, and that's why we know that this is like the beginning of where we see the humans starting, okay? Well, somewhat. Oh, this is a model of what she might have looked like too. Okay, so clearly very ape-like still. All right, this is now where we start to say, we use the word Homo habilis is when you, actually there's an overlap here. So Australopithecus was not actually gone completely, and this new species, though, has some advantages, right? They know that they had stone tools, as you can see here. Very crude, right? But they do have them, so that's showing that they're using, brain power. They're a little advanced over an animal. But notice that their brain size is still quite small, about the third of the size of what we have nowadays. Okay, there's some other differences too, but definitely you see a little advantage, right? A little moving on. Okay, all right. Now, if we go on, then you get to Homo erectus, and this is where you start to see a few changes, okay? First of all, the name erectus comes from upright man, meaning he is standing more upright. and he is more intelligent. They notice that his brain size is much larger than previous species. Still not as large as our current one, but definitely showing improvement. And we know that that improved brain size, right, also translated to better tools. They learn to be better hunters. So, of course, all those advantages are probably going to make them grow as a population and survive better. Okay, this is also the group that we know from evidence that they actually moved over a long period of time, right? Migrating from Africa and into other places, again, over a long period of time, but even to India, China, Asia, and Europe. Okay, so we believe that they were the first one to use fire. All right, Homo erectus. Oh, my went back.
To prepare the kill, the greatest key to our survival. At 300 degrees, a spark. Fire. Our planet is the only known place in the universe with the right conditions for fire to burn. It's the element that makes us who we are.
Cooking our foods gives us a second stomach outside of our body. Now we begin to digest the fats, the carbohydrates, the proteins before we chew the food, making it easier for us to digest it. Which means we get a smaller stomach and therefore a bigger brain.
Better nutrition boosts the human brain. Over 2 million years, it more than doubles in size, with trillions of connections. The most complex structure in the universe, letting us think, communicate, and love.
It could be argued that society, any kind of society, began with the cooking of meat over flame.
Okay, and so I cut myself off with the video, but what I was going to say before is we also think that they may be the group that started spoken language, right? And as you can imagine, having a spoken language is going to have an advantage in survival also, right? You can work as a team better to hunt and cooperate on things better. So that is the current belief. Okay, and then Homo sapiens are actually a group, a larger group, that includes the next two. Okay, so these are where we're getting more human-like, all right? So Neanderthals were very powerfully built, right? A little shorter, a little stockier, a lot of thick bones and muscles. They have very heavy slanted brows. This is where you kind of tend to think of like that caveman comic strip thing. But they're not, as dumb as that, so that's a misnomer. We do think that their brains were large, maybe about the same, or I've even read sometimes that some are larger than ours. And we have some evidence that they did some things that other previous ones hadn't. So, for instance, like ritual burials, we have evidence that they went and took time and obviously had maybe like a ceremony or something, and covered. We found someone covered in flowers, and like a funeral, right? And so that's showing something. That's showing maybe some belief in like the afterworld or some kind of, so that is definitely showing their brain power. But the Neanderthals did not survive. We're not really sure why, but they didn't make it and they died out. Okay, the Cro-Magnons then are the ones that we want to talk about that are more like humans, right? They have that basically identical as to modern humans. They're still a little shorter than we are nowadays. Like they're probably about 5.5 feet tall. We do have evidence that they had migrated into Europe and Asia. We have evidence that they had specialized tools, so they also planned their hunts and stalked their prey and were a little more advantage with their bigger brain power. And maybe that's what helped them survive versus the Cro-Magnons, that they were more advanced with their, planning and language and everything. We don't really know, but we do think that they lived at the same time and may have, or we think they did, overlap at some point, and people knew each other, right? We know that they had some children, mixed children, so there was some mixing of that. That's something new we didn't know in the old days. They used to think that one died out before the other. Okay? All right, and then real quickly, I just want to show you, this is an overview of what you read, the Paleolithic age, right? Paleolithic means old Stone Age, obviously coming from their stone tools. So you do need to know this date range, 2.5 million years ago. This is when, like, we're saying that they're really starting to become human-like, right? To 8,000 BC. And it's this time period where they were smart enough to use stone tools. Okay, that's where we start the time. They, as you read, are hunter-gatherers, the men mostly doing the hunting and the women and children doing the gathering of the berries and the nuts and things like that. That is actually very important, right? Because when it was difficult to find meat, then you can still survive. So it was still a very important job. They are nomadic, meaning they follow the animals, and especially remember that there are ice ages happening during this time period. So as the ice age is making the grass and things harder to come by, the animals move on, so they have to follow the animals. Same with, of course, if they're trying to get fruit or berries or anything, they need to also go where they're still growing. So that's why we see some movement, right? They're nomadic. Let's see what else. They're not just stone tools, I should say. They're mostly stone, but they made bone. It progresses. As you see that they get smarter, so do their tools, right? So at first it's kind of whatever they find, and then as they get smarter, they realize, oh, if I knock this flint type of stone, right, it has a sharp edge, and so I can now use it like a knife, right? So as the tools progress during this time too, and I already mentioned to you that the language develops. And then the last thing I want to talk to you, of course, they also are trying to manage the ice age, right? So they use those tools to, start wearing clothes because it's getting colder, and they're using animal skins, and they're using what they have, caves, usually for their lodging. But then as the time period gets later and later and they get smarter and smarter, they do tend to do some building, still pretty rudimentary, and remember, they're still moving around, so it's nothing permanent. Okay, all right, and then the last thing I want to talk to you about real quickly is the cave paintings. So we're going to do an activity with that, but look at these cave paintings. These were found during World War II. A couple of teenagers stumbled into this cave, and there are actually many different examples. This is one of the more famous ones of these animals, and I'm not going to tell you too much because we're going to do an activity with it today, but just take a look and see what you think of what is done in these and how well they were preserved, right? And what they might be, why they might have made these, notice what they are drawing. And I want you to think about that because we're going to do an activity today.